Good evening, everyone. Welcome to third live session for the course Usability Engineering. So, in this particular lecture, I will be covering key concepts from week 3 lecture videos. So, have you gone through week 3 lecture videos, which was about user-centric design process? Okay. So, in this particular session, I will be clarifying your doubts through a live interactive session, and probably this will help you solving the assignments for that particular week. Okay, so let's move ahead. Okay, so if you have attended my last class, so you may remember that we are discussing about scenario based uh, development, right? So we are talking about what is scenario based design, and the another one is use case scenario. Use case scenario. Okay, and there is a difference between use case scenario and scenario based design. So, do you remember what was the difference? You can use your mic or chat. Okay, so basically, use case scenario is more generic in nature. It talks about various, user use scenarios uh, of a particular application, and scenario based design is about defining a particular instant of a use case scenario. To give an example, if you have a mobile application and the mobile application offers various tasks like uh, trans- money transfer, credit card application, then booking ticket or paying bills. Okay, then use case scenarios include all these use case scenarios: booking ticket, paying bills, then transferring money or credit card, applying for credit card, etc. However, when you say scenario based design, that means we explore one particular scenario, like how a user is using that particular feature of the application, and understand and try to figure out in great detail the user's issues and various usability concern but the user have. Okay, so scenario based design is basically an instance of a use case scenario. Okay. And we talked about a very generic framework, which is a scenario based development framework, where so I was talking about in the last class that the framework have mainly three phases: analyze, design, and prototype and evaluate. And in each phases we consider scenarios. For the analyze phase, we basically look for scenarios from stakeholders and field visits, and we consider various claims from competitive products, and we try to analyze the problem scenario using from those scenarios. Similarly, for design, we consider scenarios for activities, we consider scenarios for information transfer communication, we also consider interaction scenarios, and there also it is again an iterative process. We consider the guidelines, the theories that are already available in the literature, and again also we consider the real-time data that we gathered during our analyze phase, based on which we develop certain usability requirements, claims, and we try to change into the design by including those usability claims or requirements. Okay, and that's how these two processes are iterative. So basically, we optimize the design from theoretical perspective, where there are set of guidelines, and we will also try to optimize the design from the usability claims that we have generated. Then the next phase is prototype and evaluate, where again we consider scenarios. So scenarios like user testing scenarios, where we actually evaluate a particular system, either using formulative evaluation method, which is iterative, and or summative evaluation method, which is like at the end of all development you finally do a summative evaluation. So in that particular context of scenario based design, we also talked about what are some important elements that one need to consider or extract from a scenario based design. So we talked about setting, actors, tasks, goals, plans, evaluation, actions, and events. So I gave one example of using a medical device, of which is a wound healing device, for a war scenario. Okay, and I was giving the example that how you can detect. So what are the elements you need to detect when you are studying that particular use case scenario? So basically, as a setting, we need to figure out what sort of environment we are working on. So if it is a war scenario, then we need to consider the the rugged nature of the environment, the dust, the pollution, the unavailability of resources like electricity. So all these things we need to consider when we define the setting. Then when we are saying like actors, that means who are the users. So who are the users in that particular context, whether this particular device is used by a medical practitioner or is it used by someone like a army personnel. So those are the people who are using it. Then what are the goal? Okay, so particular medical device may have multiple abilities, capabilities. For example, for a particular therapy, this particular mode can be used. For example, if this device provide three different modes, depending upon particular scenario, that particular actor, a particular medic person can choose a particular mode. So he need to define his goals in that particular task. Then planning means what actually happens in the mind of the user when a particular this particular person try to operate this particular interface. Okay, so this is more like concluding on the specific task goal and planning the set of activities he is going to perform. And this happens mostly internally. It's not visible. It's more like a cognitive process. And there are techniques through which actually a designer can extract those cognitive processes as well. Next is evaluation. Evaluation means after that cognitive planning, how that particular person come to a conclusion that I will choose this particular order. For example, this particular device have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 button interface and a LCD, right? So if it is first time, okay, or if it is not his first time, even if he has to set certain goals. For example, goal is to wound a particular chronic wound. Okay, so he will choose particular therapy. So the planning is like, okay, I will first apply a particular dressing at the wound site, and then I will connect this particular device and I will set probably that particular therapy number 3. That is the planning. And evaluation means he will figure out like okay, how he can actually avail this particular recipe. Basically, what will be his step? Okay, so mentally he is planning like what sort of steps he will be executing. Okay, so mentally a person is executing like so evaluating like what sort of navigation he will perform, and then after planning he will move to actions. Okay, okay, after actions, so that particular person start operating this particular interface, and then when this particular operate, the system will give certain feedback as events. Okay, so that can be the buzzing sound when this particular device operate. So that's the indication that system is running. So system also needs to talk to the person saying that, okay, I'm running. Or again, like if he make a move, like, okay, if I press this particular button, the person should also get a feedback like, okay, already it's moved to the next phase. So whether it's a sound or whether it's a change of display, all such information needs to be displayed. Okay. So these are the some of the elements which actually one needs to capture in a scenario based design. Okay. Now these are very generic in nature. The scenario based development frameworks are used from ages in various design domains, whether you are talking about product design, industrial design, automotive design, UX design. In many fields these sort of techniques are used, and this only talks about the initial phase of user research. So if you see in this particular framework, we are concerned about the user as well as his activities, his planning, his goal. So everything a particular user perform in a particular scenario. Okay, so these are two users. So by user, I mean it is stakeholder. Okay, one is the user who is actually using that particular device, and the another user is the end user on which this particular device or the application has been implemented. Okay, so if you see in scenario based design, we are mainly concerned about user and its activities. Okay, however, this only involves the initial research phase. Okay, now we need to include this particular UX based development into more into a UX design process. And for that, you need to learn what we call as user-centric design process. Okay, so what is user-centered design? So you can use your mic or you can chat. Try to make this session a bit interactive. Okay, so what is user-centered design? Okay. So basically in user-centered design, we keep user at the center of product design and development. That means for all sort of decision making, we see those decision making from the window or from the lens of the user. Okay, that means whether we are trying to figure out requirements, then we'll think like, are these user requirements? When you are trying to identify or ideate some solution, then also you will think like, okay, whether this particular solution will be solving the problem of the user. Again, when we will be trying to test a particular system, then we'll again try to see whether user gets satisfied or whether user is able to solve, do certain activities or not. So in all for all such decision making or design activities, we consider user at the center of the overall design process, and that's what this user centric design means. uh, in literature, when you try to search for the definition of user-centric design, you will find uh, different definitions. Okay, some of them will concern about a philosophy. Okay, they will try to describe the user-centric design process, or the user-centric design is an like an approach, as an ideology, as a philosophy. Okay, so a philosophy, a ideology, and approach where you design keeping in mind the user all the time. So that is what is this philosophical perspective uh, we should have as a user-centric design. Similarly, user-centric design is also described as a set of processes. Okay, so these are more like methodological, or like what to do. Okay, so what sort of processes involved, methodologies involved. Then there are set of definitions where you will find that user-centered design is defined as a practice or activities where you involve with user in all such activities. Okay, so basically user-centric design covers all these aspects. Okay, it's a philosophy, it's a set of processes, it's a set of activities, but mainly all these are directed, it's all they concern about the user at the center. So user-centered design process is a comprehensive design process. It's very comprehensive in nature. That's why it's been used in many disciplines, like it's used in product design, industrial design, graphic design, movie industry, like, for various design disciplines you can consider user-centric design approach. And uh, this is very generic in nature, and so we also trying to relate user-centric design process for our purpose, which is UX design or UI design. UX design. Okay, so in UX design we'll be focusing on usability goals, user characteristics, environments, tasks and workflows, etc. For example, if we talk about this particular scenario, like we discussed in our last class, this is a scenario of a office space where, okay, so it's an office space where a particular person who is an accountant is using a particular software. Okay, so in that particular case, in a user-centric design process, we'll try to understand what are user characteristics, what is the environment in which he is working, what are the various tasks he perform, what is the workflow, and what are his usability goals and issues he find, okay, in his day-to-day life. So by retrieving this information, we will design a solution, and that's what it's called user-centric design process. Okay, so there is a definition, or there's a model defined by historically by Jeffrey Rubin, which is called a double circle model, and he tries to define user-centric design uh, by this particular model. And he's saying that first, in a user-centric design process, we are concerned about user himself and his characteristics, his mental model in relation with the particular context, in relation with the environment, in relation with his goals and objectives. And then once we understand that particular user, okay, we try to figure out a particular task context, the organization of the activities within the task, then the task flow and the task details. So difference between the context and task context and the inner circle, these factors within the inner circle and the outer circle, is that in a user-centric design process, first think, we need to understand the user first. So we need to build a set of understanding. We need to empathize that particular person, and we need to understand his behavior, his mental model, his day-to-day life activities, and then only we will concern about particular activity or task for which we are doing that particular study. For example, in this particular case, this is a scenario, I'm just giving the same example. Okay, see, if we don't know this, what generally people will do, they will simply go in this particular office, and then directly they will interview this particular person and they will ask that particular person, okay, have you used this particular software, okay, please show me how you use and what are the difficulties you face. So all these interviews they will conduct, and they will come straight, and they will start developing requirements and they will start designing solutions. Okay, but that is not the ideal way of doing or working in a user-centric design process. So what this particular model define is that first you try to get information about the user and the context. This particular context means this particular person work as a accountant. Okay, so his daily life involve working as an accountant. So this is very generic in nature. So it's all about understanding the particular user. Second, environment. That means in what kind of environment he is working. So we can say here that that particular person work in an office environment. Okay, and in his office there are many people who works beside him, and the space between two employees is hardly 3 feet. Okay, so basically he's working in a very noisy environment. So that's what information we get from for the user. Similarly, goals. Now these set of goals are like his daily goals. Like, okay, in his daily activities this particular person do activities like account accounting, or comparing budget, preparing some log data, etc. Okay, and accordingly he set his objectives. Like for accounting, it can be checking your spreadsheets for cost and expense. Then for comparing two budgets, he will again probably compare, open two windows. Okay, two windows, and then he will compare particular budgeting for, yeah, again in these two particular budgets. So based on the goals the objective will change. Okay, so this is basically a generic information about the user, and you need to understand this thing first before you actually move ahead for your inquiry. Okay, then the next thing is that you choose a particular context. Okay, once you know that this is his daily routine, now within this his daily goals and objectives, you want to explore one of his tasks. For example, you want to explore how he compare budgets. Okay, so that's basically the task context. So task context is now inquiry about how the accountant compare budgets. Okay, so this is very specific now. Now, next is task organization. So this particular task involve what sort of activities. So you basically try to understand the hierarchy of activities that a particular user needs to do. Okay, so basically this is organization of task. So first he will do this. Okay, then he will open probably the spreadsheets, compare them. Then probably he will use his calculator. He will make some calculation. Then he will open another application to write his feedback. So all these are like hierarchy of tasks. So those are known as task organization. The next activity is identifying the task flow. So basically you now want to concentrate on the particular task flow. Okay, so basically there are now three task flows: task flow 1, task flow this same 2, task flow 3. Now once you know these are three task flows, then you go into detail and identify what are the issues this particular person face, or what sort of requirements that particular person is looking for in the design. Okay, so this is again based on what we learned previously about. By identifying those elements, we will then try to figure out what sort of usability requirements we need to establish. Okay, clear? Okay, so we discussed so far about user-centric design. Okay, but the question can come into your mind that are there different methods, design approaches available? Like is it obvious? Is it not obvious that we need to consider user all the time. Okay, so we are talking about user centric, user requirements, then user testing. So is it not obvious that we need to do this, and why we need to name this as user centric design process? This is because in this particular world of design, there are many disciplines of design and there are various methods of design. So this is just a overall explanation like how design happens in a society. So we have a society, and the user or your stakeholder resides in a society. Okay, now there's a way, like you inquire about this, the societal needs, and you come up with some set of needs. So these set of needs are based on what society demands or what a particular user require in his day-to-day life. Okay, or where he feels a gap. And then what you do, you design a particular solution. Okay, this is like a product or solution or application, whatever it is. This is a solution. Okay, and you give this particular solution to the society. That's a service. Okay, whether you call it as a entrepreneurial journey or whether it's a job of a designer in an organization, the ultimate goal of this need identification is to convert those needs into some set of solution and then give them back to the society as service, right? So this particular approach of design is what we call as the analytical method of design. Okay, so let me explain this after a while. So what happens here in this particular side? What happens is that when you have set of need or requirements, after you did a contextual inquiry, you have a solution in the form of a conceptual model. So this is more like a concept. Okay, now you need to make it realistic, or you make it more feasible by doing further need analysis which are more technical in nature. So for example, if you're trying to make one particular solution which is at the concept level, it's a application, then for technical requirement you need to understand like the technical requirements or needs are like android programming, okay, or particular library class, okay, of database, or it should have some network capability. So all those technical requirements, like it should have some cloud data storage, these technical requirements come in this particular phase of product realization. Okay, okay. So when we talked about these technical requirements, we end up developing some solution in the space of science and technology. Okay, so now this solution is not a conceptual model, this is more like a functional model. Okay, so the difference between conceptual model and functional model is that this is a concept, this the initial phase of design where you have the overall architecture. Okay, and then in the science and in this the other circle, you identify the technical requirements and then you develop something which is a prototype or a proof of concept or a product which is a functional representation of the conceptual model, which is called as functional models. And then you provide that back as a scientific knowledge, and in combination you develop this particular product. Okay, now there are two ways how a particular product can reach the society back. Okay, one way is you identify a problem, okay, from the society, then identify first the set of user needs, these are user needs, and then you move to your technical requirement. You develop a technology, okay, you technology development, and you provide as a service to the society. Now the direction in which this particular design initiated is from society. So this is what we call as analytical method of design. That means the requirements is a market pull, okay, and this is where user-centric design process involved in. Okay, the other way of actually designing a product is something developed, something new comes in as a science and technology development. For example, nowadays you have heard about a lot of about AI. Okay, AI chatbot. Now there is a new chatbot called ChatGPT. No? So these are technology driven. So you have again IoT. Okay, then you have cloud computation, big data, blockchain. Okay, so these all are technologies, and then we try to understand like how this particular knowledge can be served in the society, can be used to provide some service in the society. And this kind of requirements are not basically needs, but something which we call it as something nice to have, something which is which is desired, but these are not some basic needs. When you if you do not get those, no, there should not be any problem. So this particular approach of design is called synthetic method of design. So basically these are technology push approach. So I'm trying to explain in this particular slide is that other than user-centric design process, there are several design processes available which are not only concerned about which do not concern about user as a center of every decision making. Okay. For example, when iPhone first, for Apple first launched its iPhone with a touch screen, capacitive touch screen, and your UI buttons, suddenly it was a disruptive innovation, and it like wiped the entire market of Nokia phones. So this was something like a disruption. So nobody has a societal need. Nobody has a need like okay we need a smartphone. Okay, but a technology push happens and it get a market and it get a requirements needs. So that's how a smartphone exists in today's society. So this is again a synthetic way of designing, synthetic method of design. So we today are discussing about the analytical method of design, which is user-centric design. Okay, clear? Okay, so let's move to the next slide. Okay, so now we need to understand what is the focus of user-centric design from the point of view of international standard. So ISO 9241 chapter 210, and it was been amended in 2010, defines the focus of user-centric design. Okay, so that means user-centric design is not something subjective. It is something which have scientific base, and that's the reason why it's available as a standard. Its focus is available as a standard. Okay, so so UCD, the user-centric design approach, is basically an optimistic approach to invent a new solution. So there is no guarantee that if you are using okay, there is no guarantee that if you are using user-centric design, you will probably end up a very perfect or ideal solution. But it's a optimistic approach. That means it was intentionally chosen as an approach to make a solution in line with user needs. Okay, so that's why it's called an optimistic approach. Then it starts with looking at human needs and end with answering solutions which are tailored to individual needs. So basically starts with human needs and end with again addressing human requirements. So basically it's revolve around user or human. So entire process revolve around users, basically users or stakeholders. Now UCT is about generating information about how people think, behave and act. Okay, now when you are talking about how people think, behave and act, now see the complexity of the data. Thinking is a mental operation, a cognitive operation. Okay, behave is something which is again it's probably expression of face or body posture. Okay, then act is probably is more defined, which you can probably record is like set of well defined movements. Okay, so movements, so it is easy to capture information on activities because whatever you are testing or whatever you are trying to capture, there are change of state with respect to the actions. So when there is a, like it's a Newton's law, when there is a action there is a reaction, right? So if the user is doing some action, there is some sort of reaction. So at least if you are not able to capture actions, you can capture reactions. So if someone is using yes, you can use the mic or you can use the chatbot. If you have any question, please use the chatbot or you can directly ask me over the mic. Bharat, did you raise your hand? Okay. Okay, let me continue here. So basically, actions and reactions can be easily captured or monitored in a user study. However, capturing expression need your skill, a designer skill to capture expression, whether it's body posture or facial expression. Similarly, capturing mental information like what sort of uh, you know, thought process a particular user have and how he evaluate a particular task and how he makes certain decisions. So all these sort of information one need to collect in a user-centric design process. So it is difficult, and but there are ways how these can be sorted out. Okay, so UCT is again about building UCT is again building deep empathy for users. Okay, so what do you mean by empathy and why empathy building is important?
Sir, in empathy, we try to understand user feeling and emotions.
Okay, okay, see, you are right. See these two particular pictures below. Suppose you want to develop a particular uh, application, or you do not have any goal but you want to understand the context of clinical context of wound healing. Okay, so if you only do research on the clinical problem, you will see only problem from the perspective of medicine, from the perspective of healthcare. Okay, what you will see is you end up identifying what sort of, okay, what is the wound, okay, how much damage, what is the biomechanism, Biomechanism of wound healing. So why there is a wound? Why the wound did not heal? Why did not heal on time? So why, like, if it is a increase from this to this, so why it is increasing, propagating day by day? Okay, so what is the disease condition? So see, inquiry about all of this is important. Okay, this is the root cause of this particular problem, and probably that's what you are trying to solve. But this narrow vision, okay, narrow vision is only give you a functional product, but from usability perspective that may not fit the mental model of the user. You need to look at the picture, you need to look at a broader picture. What is the life of that particular person who is having that particular wound? How he conduct his daily life? So who is that person? What is his income level? What he do in his daily life? Is he a student? If he's a female, or what is his family background? What is his daily, what is her daily activities? What impacts this wound in her daily activities? So all those information, when you gather, you end up making a solution which is not only functional but also usable for the user. That means the conceptual model which a designer create. Okay, I talked about conceptual model in this particular slide, which is this one, right? So the conceptual model which a particular user create after, or designer create after understanding the requirements, need to match with the mental model of the user. Okay, so you need to gather information on the user and try to act as if designer is the user himself. So when you are designing something for your mother, when you are designing something, if you have a child, if you design something for your child, probably you will design a solution which is a perfect fit, or which will be 100% effective, okay, without giving any trouble or any pain, anything, right? So user-centric design process concern about deep empathy, so that you design something which is, appropriate for user's lifestyle and his requirements. Okay, so that's what the focus, it's defined like the goal of the focus of user-centric design process is generating ideas that resonates with the user. So in order to make ideas resonance with the user, you need to first gather correct requirement. So when you have set of requirements, you have functional requirements, and then you have some ancillary requirements. So functional requirements are the core requirements which probably your product will be based on. Now ancillary requirements are like, are the other requirements which are systemic in nature, which are more behavioral in nature, but they mainly address the usability aspect of it. Okay, so that's what is the focus of UCD. And then UCD focused on testing and validating ideas, and if you do not meet with the requirements, then you reiterate if required. So that's the overall focus what is defined in ISO 924. Okay, so these are like already defined. Okay, uh, any doubt?
No,
No,
sir.
sir. Okay. Okay, so we discussed so far about the focus of user-centric design, and also we like talked about what are the various design approaches other than user-centric design. Now we need to understand what is UCD approach and its key considerations. Okay, so here is a simple definition or simple description of how a user-centric process looks like. So I already discussed this thing previously in as a in the form of this focus of UCD, but here it is pictorially represent. So first is understanding the context of use, okay, then specify requirements, design solution, then evaluate a design against the requirements, which is basically very it looks like a sequential process. However, it's not, because what happens, like when you try to gather information, so it's not like earlier waterfall model. Okay, so in the first class we discussed about waterfall model, which is more like a, one way, only one way of moving ahead, like a waterfall. UCD is not a like a sequential process, it's more iterative in nature. That means it's natural that when you form certain set of requirements, there may be cases that you missed certain information in your contextual inquiry. So later, when you get to know about the those context or requirements, there should be possibility of you know going back to actually those scenarios, understanding those scenarios, and reiterate your requirements. Okay, so a method demands, user-centric method demands requirements that has to be recursively modified. Similarly, once you have arrived at set of requirements, you then there are more details which are missing in this particular diagram. You come up with some functional specification, then you generate ideas, then you select ideas, then you design your final set of solutions. Okay, and then you evaluate those. So evaluate multiple solutions with users and against the requirements. Now what can happen is, like, during this particular testing there can be change requirement in the design. So user-centric design process allow change in the design after you tested a particular product or application with user. Okay, so this is again recursive in nature. Similarly, at the final phase also, when you are actually testing your product, if you feel that the user, you feel if you encounter a new user and his requirements are something different, then probably you again go back and try to understand that particular context, and again you want try to follow that same process again. So you again form set of requirements based on the new user. Okay, so this can happen in the user-centric design process. Probably at the time of testing you encounter a new user, and based on his requirements you again have to modify your, if you again have to actually inquire about the scenario, or you need to again go back to the specification phase. So you need to modify your specifications for that particular person. For example, if you are designing an application for someone like a normal person, and suddenly at the time of product testing you identify one person who is visually blind, like visually disabled. Okay, then probably if you decide that, okay, I need to consider this particular case also for my product design, then you take that as a new scenario, try to gather more information on that particular use case scenario, or that particular context, and then try to re-specify your requirements and modify your design accordingly. So user-centric design is a process where recursively you move up and down within these phases, and you try to establish the most ideal solution or most optimized solution you can design within a time frame. Okay, so basically user-centric design process is a very systematic process. So here are some key considerations we need to take. So user-centric design process focused on early understanding of user and his task or his her tasks. Okay, so the process of gathering information should be structured and systematic in nature. It's not like you go to a field, identify certain requirements, and then you come back and start designing. Everything needs to be systematic. So for example, if you know, if you want to explore a particular scenario, then first you need to understand what are the different ways I can get user information, who are the stakeholders, and if you understand who are the stakeholders and how to communicate with them, what should be the strategy, what set of questions you will be asking. So all these methodologically mapping you need to do prior to conducting the contextual inquiry. So it is a structured and systematic approach of gathering information. Okay, again, designer needs to be trained to collect and conduct contextual inquiry. So the designer, it's not like very easy to collect information from a contextual inquiry. So I already talked about in the previous slide, like the nature of data is not only visual data. So action based information, you can actually see action or reactions can be easily visualized, but you need to monitor behavior via expression. You need to understand the mental operation or the thought process of the user in making certain decision making. So all those needs to be captured using different techniques. So when you conduct a contextual inquiry, it's very expensive process, and expensive not from the point of view of financially expensive. It is expensive from the perspective of also time and effort. That means you may miss a particular opportunity if you do not capture it properly in the first place. So a particular designer who is actually conducting a contextual inquiry needs to be trained how he should collect or capture particular information. So prior pilot study are conducted generally to understand information. For example, designing a mobile application can be probably easy, but imagine you are sent to a war scenario. A designer is sent to a war scenario to understand the requirement. Then it's a very new environment for him, and he should know like how to interact with these people, and should he disturb them in direction, or what are the different ways he should be able to capture those user data. Okay, so probably the best way in this particular case is just to monitor and observe and shadow users to gather most of the informations, and if possible then probably you conduct interviews or see things in the field. Okay, so that's a key consideration, early focus on user and task. The second key considering is that empirical measurement and testing of product uses. So whatever study or whatever research we do on the uses of particular product, whether at the phase of product testing or initial user study when you try to evaluate a competitive uh, product, you should always focus on ease of learning and ease of use. That means, see, if you observe this particular person operating this particular device, you need to consider that this particular device needs to be easy to use and easy to learn. And if it is not, then you will collect the usability issues. Okay, so basically this is the base on which you should consider the empirical measurement. Similarly, you need to always include actual user in the context. Okay, not dummy user or not someone who is a stakeholder in that particular process. For example, if you want to know about information of problems of using a device in this particular scenario, probably you need to first observe or contact that particular person who is used to use this device, not a stakeholder who is actually sitting outside this particular scenario and who is probably the general or the major in a battalion. Okay, so he should not be the right person when you are conducting a user study. Probably he can be a person who will give some set of information which will help you as a stakeholder, but as the primary information on the user requirements and needs, you will always have to consider actual users. Then iterative design, always consider iterations. Never get frustrated, okay, that I need to design this thing again, this specification have changes, the solution is not well fitting. No, you need to do this if you want to make something optimized for users. So that's the beauty of it, and also that's the also a frustration of this particular process is that if you use this particular process in the industry, probably it's not ideal for client project, but it's definitely ideal for if you want to do some social innovation, or if you are a OEM, original equipment manufacturer, like Apple or Samsung, who actually develop products to capture their market. So for those kind of big companies and social innovation, this is very ideal. For service based companies where there's a client and you need to deliver something within time, probably you'll be able to do one or two iteration of this particular process, not indefinitely you cannot work on this particular process. So in iterative design consideration, you need to make the product needs to be designed, modified and tested recursively to satisfy user requirements, and you should be also ready to allow complete rethinking of design if the conceptual model that the designer develop is not a match to the mental model of the user. Okay. Clear. Yes. Okay. Okay, so now historically Don Norman have stated seven UCD principles which are also hold true in today's time, and these can be your set of guidelines in the design process. So if this is a design process having these phases, and this is not in detail, these are like simplified way of describing a user-centric design process. These can be set of heuristics or set of guidelines which you can consider when you are designing a user-centric design product. Okay. So these seven principles include use of both knowledge in the world and knowledge in the head. So what do you mean by that? So what do you mean by that is like, you whatever you see is not always correct. So collect all set of information that is available in the world, that includes what you observe, what you've read in literature, what is available in media, like all sort of sources, and use all these knowledge together with the knowledge in your head. That means whatever critical thinking you have in your mind from your educational background, or the logic you have in your mind. So this is always a group activity. So when you work in a group, your critical thinking plays important role in actually converting the world knowledge with your knowledge and actually generating the conceptual model for the product. So when, for example, in this particular scenario, your world knowledge is what basically you observe in that particular scenario. So basically it is that scenario based learning you have. Then probably you have data from YouTube's, like probably these days there are Ukraine, where you get a lot of media information on what happens in war, what happens to wounds, how those are get treated, how far is the hospital nearby. what is the war scenario, so what happens in a war, so all those information you can get from the world. Then you have the logics inside your head, which may be from the perspective of clinical or from the perspective of engineering. So in your team probably you have a clinician, in your team probably you have a designer, in your team probably you have a engineer. So all they have their inputs, and together with the world knowledge and your critical insight you try to come up with a conceptual model for the product. Conceptual model, it's more like what will be the solution in the form of the key features of the solution. So this is probably a solution with its key features. This is the conceptual model. Now, once you come up with the conceptual model, the next task is to simplify the structure of tasks. So whenever you are designing a particular product, so first you come up with the conceptual model. So basically, if I say, like, if this is a this particular device, if I say, okay, this particular device should have a ability to start and stop, then ability to mode select, ability to see monitor the pressure level, then ability to change pressure. So all these can be a part of the conceptual model, but you do not know how in reality these elements will be organized together and how navigation will happen. So when you are designing navigation, when you make when you're designing the information architecture, or the we're planning the interaction or navigation of a user interface, you always try to avoid cognitive overload. You do not make something too much deep in the hierarchy that user needs to remember things, what he previously navigate through. So you should avoid overloading his short-term and long-term memory, as well as it should not include a much cognitively complex procedure which need a lot of processing, and user may not able to solve, or may not able to uh, get to know about this particular navigation. So he may get frustrated and he may leave that particular task. Provide mental aid. So if you have something, so try to design or structure the task in a such a way that you provide some sort of help or mental aid, so that it's easy for the user to avoid those mental processing. Okay. Similarly, when you are designing the task or activities, always remember that the user should feel the control over the tasks. Imagine if this particular device have some problem, and once he start the button and automatically it set a mode and it starts. So the user will not feel in control with the device. So for every feature that particular device have, the user should feel control uh, on its use. Okay. And these are like mental aid. So when you say, you are saying seeing some arrow, you are seeing some plus, instead of, for example, if this is a Russian device and you write something in I don't know Russian, but you write something in some unknown language, and then if a Indian person have to use this particular device, instead of plus or minus sign, if you put plus as plus and minus as minus, then probably it is very difficult for the person to use. So making it graphical, or making it universally acceptable sign, give a mental aid for the person to recognize what maybe the use of this particular interface. Similarly, again, see, if you when you are putting a small rectangular seal out, this gives the intuition, or the conclusion, that very easily that user can conclude that this is a button which is pressable. Okay. Again, if you put something like here, probably the user will know that, okay, you need to press the button here only, not here. So these are the mental aid you generally provide to simplify your tasks. Another principle is make things visible. Okay. So what do you mean by make things visible is that you try to bridge the gulf of execution and evaluation. So what is execution and evaluation and what is this gulf? Okay. So these are basically we are talking about the mental operation or the cognitive operation. So what's happened whenever if user first figure out his objective, one he figure out his objectives first, he evaluate his actions. So evaluate or plan his action. Okay, so first plan, then evaluate, and then only he execute. Between the evaluation to action, sorry, execution, this is what is called as gulf of execution and evaluation. Because if a particular user cannot figure out a particular interface, cannot figure out the particular way a particular task needs to be performed, the way of navigating into that particular interface, then that task will not be executed. Similarly, this particular gulf of evaluation also have a gulf between planning to evaluation phase. So when you plan something like, okay, I need to give this particular mode, I need to give particular therapy, but now mentally I need to evaluate, right, that okay, these are the ways how I will be operating. I will first select mode, then start. So here's an example of the process. See this process, how this process defined. It says use mode button to select CNPWT. So this is probably the name of the therapy, a particular therapy. So use mode button multiple times, probably it will enable this particular NPWT therapy. Then use previous and next button to select the pressure parameters. So whenever you press plus or minus, probably here or here the pressure level will increase or decrease. Then start, pause or stop button to start the therapy. So basically this particular button you place to start the therapy. So there is no use defined for these two buttons here. Now it always happens like a interface is made for lot of applications, lot of use cases. However, in a particular use case scenario, you may only require few features or few buttons here. Okay, so use case scenario probably include all the interfaces, but in a particular use case scenario, scenario, user scenario of providing this particular therapy, probably you will be requiring only six. So the planning and then evaluating that what all buttons I will be choosing and what will I will be clicking is again something that needs to be considered to be intuitive, so that the user do not face problem in identifying a particular interface, okay, in identifying a particular features or interaction ways. Okay, because these devices can be very critical. A mistake can be like life threatening, so you cannot make mistake. Like it's not like a trial and error based, like you first place certain mode and then start, oh no, it's not working, let's change. So that may not happen in in these kind of applications. So that's why it's saying like make things visible. That means make it easy, the gulf of execution, so beats the gulf of execution evaluation. The user should be able to figure out particular flow of task and features. Okay, so this second point defines the key concepts here, that whatever task or features you define when you are designing a user interface, try to reduce this bridge of execution and evaluation. Next principle is getting mapping right. This means when you are mapping something in this particular world, like if I say plus is for increasing, minus is for decreasing, that means everyone should understand like plus is for increasing. It's not like I make a symbol like this, and then here I give double this, or I make a new symbol for plus I put three arrow, and then negative I put three arrow, but for next and previous I put the opposite. Okay, so this should not happen. So whatever you are mapping, it should map, uh, it should map like generic information which should be widely acceptable. So in most of the cases when you are trying to map the particular flow of task or particular feature, you use graphics, okay, to make things understandable. Because writing, I had already said, like there are issues like different, there may be language barriers. But if you are making use of symbols or some graphical information, for example, if you want to make a small clip here, like how to choose this particular particular therapy, probably one small animation can show like, okay, for C and PWT press this particular button, and it says arrow 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 arrow, okay, mode. So this probably will help mapping the intuition perfectly with what this particular design is intended to. So you are probably mapping the conceptual model of the designer with the mental model of the user, which should be universal. It's not like for one user it's different, another user it is different. Okay. Next principle is exploit power of constraint. That means when you are defining task, do not think to make the task like user involved in a multitasking environment. Make the tasks linear. Make the user feel that there's only one things he need to do at a time. Okay, it's not like uh, it can be sequential, but it should not be pushing two buttons parallelly or doing two things in parallel. So we humans are not good at parallel processing. Those are like that is what computers can do better. We are more systemic in nature. We can do things sequentially, systematically, and probably putting a logical order in our actions will give a better intuition and affordance to the to user intuition about the interface. Okay. Next principle is design for errors. Okay. So design for error means as a designer you should know where there can be error happens. So there are some errors which cannot be avoided. It's not about software programming errors. It's like, for example, battery down when system is in operation. So this is can be an error prone case. Similarly, whenever you are fitting the device with the user, the patient, there can be leakage. Okay, those are natural, like leakage can happen because of the condition, wound condition, the oil content or the blood, or how moist is the skin. So there can be leakage happen. So consider all such errors and provide options for recovery. So that is again one goal in a user-centric design process. It's not like a dead end. If error happens and you cannot do anything, so always provide, always make things workable for a user. So keep these things in prior notice when you are designing something, and even if something happens when you do not know, at least provide some information for SOS or some sort of help and documentation, especially for these particular devices. Okay, so when all fail, standardize. That means when you are trying to map things, okay, based on user requirements, and if certain requirements are necessary without user requirements, make those as standardized, like make international standard if something needs to be designed without your mapping. For example, if your device needs to be electrically insulated, right? Or it should be waterproof. Now user may not tell you about those requirements. So user requirement do not suggest you to make the device electrically safe or waterproof. But if there's a requirement that you feel from the knowledge of your head, which already I talked about, that this is important in this that particular scenario, use them. If you cannot map them against the user requirements or user's mental model, make them as standard. Okay, use existing standard, or if existing standard does not exist, then make a standard. So for example, in a mobile application, the positioning of a phone, okay, sorry, positioning of the camera, front camera, so where it should be positioned is not defined by user, but now it's like a standard. Every phone will have a uh, you know uh, camera at this particular location. This is because this is the best possible way how engineers can s- solve the problem of perspective. Probably when you place your phone in front of your face, probably you cannot put a camera in the middle of the LCD, right? So if you put it down, probably it will be looking like you are looking up, and if you probably look at the side, probably it will be always like seeing from the side. So that is the best place where whenever you are using that particular phone, it looks like you are actually facing that particular person. So there is no requirement, but from the functional requirement or perspective, probably that became a standard. Okay. Okay, so those are the seven UCD design principles, and I hope I could give you proper explanation. Okay, so any doubt here? Okay, so let's move to the next. So what we understood so far are user-centric approach, user-centric principles, characteristics. Now we are into the activities of user-centric design process. Now these are very generic process activities. So previously like discussed here about the basic phases, which are not very detailed one, which are applicable to many disciplines. And I already told you like there are intermediate steps which are missing here. So here I'm trying to give a more detailed uh, UCD process from the perspective of design activities. Okay, so already I have defined, like discussed in the first two slides, that UCD is a approach, it's a process, it's a set of activities. Okay, so far we discussed about UCD as a approach and UCD as a process in our previous slides. Now in this particular slide, I'll be discussing UCD as a set of activities. So as a set of activities, what you perform in a user-centric design process is first scoping. Scoping means trying to uh, create a vision of what you will be doing. Okay, you should have a goal. So basically goal setting. Now UCD process happens s- soon after you set a goal. For example, there should be some sort of motivation, right? In the first place, whenever you are trying to choose a particular topic, a particular area, there may be some set of initial uh, you know ignition in your mind, or some set of clue you have in the beginning that this probably is a problem area and I should explore. Okay, so first you look for that particular scope, and in that particular phase you do contextual inquiry. Okay, so you have a goal first. Again, these are again not very detailed one. I will try to give you much more detailed description of the process or activities here. So probably the very first thing is a initial, objective or a motivation or a clue. Okay, so that can be the initiation of a like a user-centric design process. Then what you do, you try to do some sort of research. So in the research, what you do contextual inquiry. In the contextual inquiry, you try to gather information like who are the users, who are the other stakeholders, who are the end users and other stakeholders, and what are the different ways we can capture the information. Then probably will identify what are the scenarios, okay, and in which particular scenario you find a problem, and then you are detailed inquiry, you perform detailed inquiry about that particular scenario, and then you collect all those sort of data. So basically in this particular phase, via these activities you are scoping, you are doing scoping of your uh, requirement, you are probably trying to validate the requirement. Next, what you do, you analyze those data that you generated from inquiry, contextual inquiry. Probably the form of the data may be very different. So some of the data can be like interview videos, some of the data can be like quality quantitative information like survey information, like can be survey information, quantitative data. Some of them can be just mm, you know interview answers. Okay, so see the nature of the data are different, video is different, qualitative survey information is different, and some of them may be only observations which you have only images. So then you need to analyze all the data, and then you need to come up with set of requirements. Okay. Okay. So in detail, analyze phase involve all the data, collection of all the data, analyze of the data, and then identify set of requirements. Next is design phase. So in the design phase, what you do, these requirements are first converted into functional specifications and constraints. Now see the difference between functional specification and constraints are that functional specification is something that you desire to achieve. Constraint is something you are restricted, you restrict in your design. Okay. So for example, if you are designing, I'll give you an example. Imagine you are designing a bike. You are designing a bike. If user said like the way I need to, the requirement is like I need to carry luggage. Okay, I need to carry luggage. That means your bike chassis should be strong enough to bear a load of probably 50 kg. Example. So that means now specification comes like this, that the strength of the chassis strength. Now I'm giving an example of product design, but just to give an example, what is the difference between functional requirement, functional specification, and constraint is that probably the strength of the chassis in Newton meter force probably is a specification that you need to consider to achieve. You need to achieve this particular strength to in order to carry 50 kg load. However, constraint can be like, okay, the weight of the bike should not be more than 500 kg, because that will affect your mileage. So this is a constraint. So you always try to avoid scenario where it should not go about 500 kg, but you are free, you are okay with 499 or anything below 500. But That is not a desire, but this is a desire not to achieve. And the functional specification is something that you want to achieve to meet the requirements. Okay, clear? Okay, so once you have the functional specification and your constraints, you design, you ideate first, ideate solutions, a lot of solutions you ideate, then you design one particular concept, not one but several particular concepts, and you select those while validating the concepts with the user. So what you do here, you basically do user testing. Again, you can do also formative evaluation. User testing and formative evaluation is a little different. In user testing, you perform user testing, the system testing of your of your concept. So you give the system to a user, and the user interact with the system, and he will perform particular task. So that is user testing. Formative evaluation is more like based on certain specification, you evaluate the system, and if the system meet those requirements, then you are okay. But if it does not, then you reiterate the design. So again, here to analyze, you again analyze, reanalyze the requirements, if it is, if it is meeting or not. Then once it meet the particular user requirements, or if you establish validation, then it deliver. Okay, you deliver the product to the final stage, which can be like a product to the market. You can commercialize probably the product, but again you may receive feedback, which is after sales feedback. So there's always this opportunity that new contextual inquiry or new scoping may leads to even after the product is launched in the market. Okay, so these are the activities in a user-centric design process. Now, user-centric design process is very generic. That's why these are generic set of activities which are useful for any set of design. For example, here I gave the example of bike. So user-centric design process can be used. Now, the famous Nelson and Norman group, Jacob Nelson and Don Norman, this group, they they modified the basic user-centric design process into something called UCD thinking process for UX design. Okay, so now this is more tailored for UX design. Now they said like the user-centric design process for UX design uh, can be break down into three main phases: understand, explore, and materialize. Same like scope and analyze, then explore, probably design and validate, then materialize, probably deliver. Okay, this is like similar to scope and analyze, explore is probably design and validate, and then you have the deliver. However, they have their own steps or activities. The first activities which they uh, define is empathize. So instead of what we said earlier as user study, they said you empathize with the user. That means in the process of empathization, you gather all sort of information from the user, from the stakeholders, via their actions, via their behavior, via their cognitive process, and try to understand their requirements. So this is similar to scope. Now after that, you define the need. You define the need or the requirements, which can be defining the need, then defining the specification. So when I say defining need, this is one step ahead of specification. From the specification we come to parameters. Then next stage is ideate. You ideate. Now based on your specification and requirement, you ideate solution. So you may have multiple solutions, which you some of them you further select for prototyping. So initially it can be a low fidelity prototype, maybe paper prototype, or can be very small scale production prototype, and then you test those prototype with user. So testing can be again user testing or can be formative testing. So you test those and then you implement finally. Okay, and it says like similar to like the generic UCD process, like you can move from define to empathize phase and at any time. So basically, the definition of needs and the requirements may get recursively changed if you feel the requirement of doing the contextual inquiry again. Similarly, your ideation can again happen. So you can again generate new concepts if there's a change in requirements, then your need, you may probably have to change the concepts. Similarly, if idea changes, prototypes also can change. So prototyping based on designing certain prototypes, probably if there are complexities or some changes you have to incorporate in your ideas, probably you need to go back. Similarly, while testing, probably you may feel like your prototype is not competitive enough for the user testing. Probably you need to change the prototype again. Okay, so again there can be at the prototyping stage, if you feel like there needs to be change in the perspective, or change in the uh, the motivation or capturing the new user requirement, probably you need to go back to empathize phase again. After implementation also, based on user feedback or customer feedback, you may again look for new rethinking of the entire design process. Okay, so these are basically an implementation of the user centric design process for UX design. Okay. Okay, so what we understand from these activities and design thinking process is that user centric design process is not just a subjective process. Okay, it's rooted in deep scientific knowledge. That means whatever process we are doing is systematic, organized, and the way we are capturing data is either quantitative and qualitative, and there are ways how to capture information, there are ways how to analyze information. So everything is scientific, it's not something subjective in nature. And this particular process require proof against decisions. So for every decision making, whether you are talking about does that need exist, or does that particular solution work, or does that particular usability issue resolved, so for everything we need to get proof, okay, in this particular process, and all this depends upon the data we generated. So many people think like user-centric design process is a waste of time. So rather we can go ahead in a product design process with our gut feeling. But the point is like, believe me, like most of the time our gut feeling, even if you are experienced person like 10 years of experience, we may miss important findings or important requirements that probably a contextual inquiry will probably give a better understanding. So doing user-centric design process is not a waste of time, rather it saves time when your product does not match the user's mental model. Similarly, as I said, it's not about designing product with your gut feeling, but it's about contextual finding. It's like what the population says about. Okay, clear. Okay, so let me move to the next thing. Okay, so here we define all the aspects of user-centric design process. We discussed about the user-centric design process as the philosophy, the approach in phases. We try to define the activities, the principles. Okay, now we understood one thing, like throughout the process, we are concerned about the user, his environment, his tasks, his context, everything. Like now, the big question is like how to involve users in the design process. So now, as I told you, there are different kind of information you may be looking for. Sometimes the information can be just action and reaction, which can be easily monitored via observation or video recording. Sometimes the information are more behavioral in nature. So this behavioral information needs to be recognized in a certain way. Similarly, informations like cognitive processing, the user's mental model, while user's mental operations, those also needs to be tracked so that we can figure out exactly where the user face any difficulties. Okay, so here are some techniques, okay, and their purpose, and at what stage of the design process those are helpful. So generally, interviews, the background interviews and questionnaires are helpful at the very beginning of a design process. And interviews means interviewing directly the user, the stakeholder via and prepare certain questions, and then you ask those. So these are mainly done in order to collect data on needs, okay, and also to understand the expectations of the user and understand what are the various other design alternative and what are the issues they have. Then sequence of work interviews, okay. So these are work interview means while the person is in work, the user in work, you try to interview them. So this kind of technique is also helpful in early stage design, and the purpose is to collect data related to sequence of work to be performed with the artifacts. That means when a particular you want to understand if daily activities or workflow of a person, probably you need to interview him throughout the day while he is moving with his various work activities. So this kind of interviewing is called sequence of work interviews. Then focus group. Focus group is again a group discussion where you invite or you connect stakeholders and experts within the system and then discuss with them about the various issues and requirements. So this is very much similar to get expert opinion on the set of requirements that already you have figured out via your primary study. These are again used in the early phase of design cycle. However, these needs to be adopted after you do your primary contextual inquiry, which would be observation or direct field study like that. Then only you should use focus groups. Usability testing is generally done at the final stage of design, where you design your product and then you mm, give the product or system for user testing and then collect information on issues or interaction concerns the user face or system faults they may encounter. So all those information needs to be collected at the final stage of design process. So usability testing is done for that particular purpose. Similarly, general purpose interviews and questionnaires can be done at any time. However, those are generally used for collecting customer feedback after you commercialize a particular product. So these may be interviews and questionnaires that the marketing people use, and they try to collect information on their from their customers who use their product and get the feedback to understand if the product needs any sort of changes. On-site observation is something like a field study. So you go to the particular environment, you try to figure out the user and its environment and his daily activities. So these are again used at the very initial phase of design cycle. So you collect information about the user, his practice, and various artifacts. Role playing walkthrough is more like trying to empathize the user by becoming the user yourself and then trying to see uh, how you perform that particular activities and how the designer faces issues. So this is more like um, trying to understand the requirements at the early or mid point of the design cycle. Generally, we try to evaluate the user needs. Okay, so we try to um, be in that particular scenario and try to understand the user needs, and by being the user himself. And also these are also useful in prototype evaluation, where we act as the user, and then we try to evaluate the system from our perspective by doing walkthroughs and simulations. So this is again, these are some of the useful techniques. And other than these, like, there are a lot of techniques which are useful. For example, there are techniques like shadowing, there are techniques like think aloud protocol, there are techniques, and there are another empirical techniques to understand the usability of interfaces. Okay, so several techniques are available, but these are some of the examples, for your understanding. Okay, so let's me give you an example here. Okay, so here are two scenarios. One is the same office environment I was talking about, and the other one is a clinical scenario where a particular uh, doctor is probably treating some sort of fractured leg of a person. Okay, so which particular contextual inquiry technique you will be using? So can you tell me? Yes. Okay. So basically, if you look for a environment like a office scenario, really the scenario can be like there are a lot of people working in this particular environment. So probably by being in that particular environment for in the first day of your inquiry, you probably will not be able to talk to any of these personals because you may not know them. So the first thing can be like getting appointment or getting a permission from higher authority, and probably you move within that particular office environment and try to observe the environment, the crowd, the environmental noise, the work environment, and the distance between the personnels, how they interact with them, what how they work, and how many times they move, they leave their their seats. So all those information probably you can do via your on-site observation technique. Okay, then probably you will you will get the opportunity to meet one of the personnel whom you have targeted, and then probably you try to get get an appointment from him and try to interview him. So probably another method can be background interviews and questionnaires. Okay, then probably he will allow you to understand his workflow. Okay, so while he is working, you may sit beside him and trying to interview him while he is involved with his daily activities. So that can be your sequence of work interviews. Okay, okay. So once you get to know about this particular scenario, probably then you can move ahead and consult the higher authorities for further discussion, which can be focus group. So first they can be your on-site observation, on-site observation. Second can be background interviews. The third can be your sequence work interviews. Fourth can be focus group. Okay, so you can probably consider 4 days interaction with this particular person or this in this particular office to get to know about particular scenario. once you get to know about your scenario, probably you need to set another objective where you want to know about what sort of action, uh, behavior or mental operations this particular platform do while using particular application. So that can be probably a second set of contextual inquiry, where probably for understanding you you do protocol analysis or think about protocol or another techniques to understand how this particular person use particular application. So that's the sort of contextual inquiry techniques that it can use. Next is the medical scenario. Similar to this, here the context is a little bit different because this is a clinical scenario. Probably there will be not much crowd here. However, they are performing some tasks which are very critical in nature. So you may not able to disturb them, and probably you may not get a permission in the first place to observe them closely. So you need to get permission first, then probably get appointment, and probably you may miss one or two such sessions probably when they are free, and then they will give you a demonstration of how they perform their daily activities. And once you are used to the environment, you try to capture information on the environment, the facilities, the number of staff, the kind of treatments. So all those information you can collect via your field study. So initially it can be on just observation. Then if they allow you, probably while doing their activities, you can interview them or ask them what they are doing, what are their daily activities. Probably that can be your sequence work activity or interviews, and probably you can do later your focus group interview to identify the needs. So that can be one way of uh, contextual inquiry. Okay, so I hope this much is clear. Okay, so finally, we'll talk about certain user types that are typical in nature, and those we consider as critical users for our research users and in the user-centric design process. So apart from the normal users who are supportive in your design process, who are supportive to your inquiry, you may get encounter some of such type of critical users. Okay, so there are three such types, which are information overloader, the control freak, and devil's advocate. Generally, they are different stakeholders. So imagine when you try to gather information from a patient. Okay, so your goal is to understand particular clinical condition probably, but patient will give all sort of information on his daily life, his effort, his pain points, okay, and also his journey. So these sort of users or stakeholders who give like large amount of information are called as information overloader. In most of the cases, not all their informations are useful, and they switch their topics. So as a designer or as a researcher, you need to anchor them to the topics to get more details. Okay, because they do not know what they need to talk about, and they do not know what you are looking for. Okay, but do not discourage them. Do not discourage them. It's like you are talking to them in a friendly manner, trying to get lot of information, and that particular person probably will switch topic from one to another. But since you want to know about only one particular information, you need to repeatedly direct him to that particular set of topic. So that's again a job of the designer to do this kind of arrangement during the contextual inquiry, so that you get the right information and do not get deviated from your goal of your contextual inquiry. So those are known as information overloader. Okay. The another set of stakeholder you may inquire, you may encounter in a in your user research are the control freak. So generally they are very knowledgeable persons. Okay. And they try to get involved in your research, in your design process, and they want to feel included and important. And though they are very knowledgeable, they can give you a lot of insights, but sometimes their information can include their personal biases. So uh, try to be specific to your requirements, and try to avoid those personal biases, and try to not uh, fix yourself with their opinions and solutions. So because they are very energetic and they love to be with you in this particular process, so they start giving their own opinion and your solutions, probably which will affect your decision making in understanding the problem as well as solution. The third type is devil's advocate. These are these also exist in the among the stakeholders and users who generally do not have any information or ideas, but they definitely will critique whenever you try to make some positive statement. Whenever you try to gather some requirements, they may critique that those requirements are not important. Probably when you try to ideate some solutions, probably they will again critique. So their roles are generally very minimal in a user research, and you try to marginalize their roles in a design process. However, they are also important because sometimes those critics may give uh, correct direction to your analysis, to your thought process. Okay. Okay, so that's all for today's session. So in this particular session, I explained you about the user-centric design process and its various activities, and the various kind of user research, the techniques of various techniques of contextual inquiry, and details about this requirement analysis you will be you'll study in the next week lectures. And also I talked about some critical user types which you need to know how to deal with them. So that's it for today's class. So if you have any doubt, please feel free to ask. Okay, okay, thank you. So the next class will be again next Tuesday, probably 28 20 of 28th of February, next Tuesday, same time, 6 to 8 p.m. Thank you very much for attending this class. Bye bye.